Hello, everyone. My name is Susanna, and what the hell is up with the fact that pregnant moms can't drink alcohol? This has been kind of a question of mine on and off. It's not something I've really looked into very much because I'm not pregnant, I'm not a mom, and I do enjoy drinking, but it was always something I would get to in the future. But we're going to dive into why they can't drink, what happens to a baby's brain when this is happening, and really, why should anyone care about it? But first, this is Ask Me, I'm a Scientist, where each episode I bring on a different expert and just ask them your questions. I open that up in the social media boxes. You can follow me on that. Remember to like and subscribe here just so you don't miss any videos and you can join in on the live chats. And so I'm super excited today because we get to talk to somebody who I have wanted to talk to for so long. And that's because, Thiago is an amazing person. And I say this in the fact that I have only just started talking to him, but he is a PhD student in neuroscience in Milwaukee. Oh, is that Wisconsin? Oh my gosh. Illinois, Wisconsin. Oh, okay. Wisconsin. I grew up in the Midwest. That's terrifying. And he studies all of this amazing stuff about how alcohol affects brain development and what that means for fetuses. But really, we just connected on social media, and this seemed like a great excuse to chat with you. Thank you so much for coming on, Thiago. Why don't you tell our audience a little bit more about yourself?
Cool. Yeah. So I am originally from Brazil, as you can tell by the very, very Brazilian name. I'm very upset because I'm not even the first actual Brazilian on here, but whatever. I'll get through it. But I moved to the US almost 8 years ago. Did my undergrad at the University of South Florida down in Tampa, Florida. Somehow ended up in Milwaukee in the middle of the cold winter. And yeah, so studied neuroscience for about 4 years now. Really, really challenging sometimes, but it is like one of the most fascinating topics I can think of to study. And so since I think second year of PhD, so like 2 years ago, we've been focusing on fetal alcohol syndrome, and actually it's called like fetal alcohol spectrum disorders. We can get into it later, but it's like a whole umbrella of disorders, not just one disease. Yeah, and it's really cool.
That's awesome. Well, we are glad you're here in the US. I am jealous. I've never been to Brazil, but I've only heard good things. So let's see.
It is really great.
Yeah, and okay, this is so off topic. I hope that you know what I'm talking about. One of my favorite foods is those little, like they're just little bread buns, and they have some. They're kind of like cheese.
Yeah, cheese bread.
Yeah. What is that? What am I eating in that case?
It's called pão de queijo, which it basically translates to cheese bread, but I don't know why it tastes so different than just flour and cheese, but it is like a staple of Brazilian cuisine.
It's the best.
You can get them on Amazon, I think. There's like frozen ones you can get on Amazon.
Yeah, there's frozen ones you can get at the grocery store. I don't get them because it would be like buying an entire gallon of ice cream. I would eat the entire thing in one sitting. And then I wouldn't even feel bad about it though. There'd be no guilt. It's just like, oh, well,
No
self-care.
shame.
All right, so we're not here to talk about how delicious Brazilian food is, though. We could probably just do a whole thing on that. But let's go back to the topic at hand. You know, you told us a little bit about neuroscience and these different topics, but you know, okay. I want to get to this question immediately. Actually, Liesl asked this on Twitter, and I thought this was a great question. It's something I hadn't really thought about. And we're going to launch right into it. So Liesl said, before we knew about the risk to fetal health, some women drank while pregnant and had healthy babies. How did these cases fit into the narrative of drinking and fetal health? And I guess that kind of ties in with one of my questions of, I mean, the whole topic is, why does it matter? People do it. There's conflicting stuff. If we can be fine, why do we care?
So that's kind of like the same question I get almost every seminar we give, because there is still like it's 2020. There's still that like proverbial knowledge of my mom had a glass of wine a day and I'm fine. But if you dig enough into the papers and everything, there is like some anecdotal evidence back to like Aristotle and like ancient Greece that people already knew that like I think Aristotle had like a very misogynistic quote about like how drunken woman, like foolish woman or whatever. But we kind of knew this forever. That one, you drink a lot. To the most extreme, you can have like a miscarriage. You can have like a baby that's basically not born. Most of the cases, you're going to have softer, like milder symptoms. So a lot of the things that we now understand that fall into like fetal alcohol spectrum disorders, people just thought my kid is kind of weird. My kid is hyperactive. My kid is just a little bit. They never made that association. I think fetal alcohol syndrome was only coined like in I think the 70s. But we know for that long, like since forever, that if you drink a lot, your kid's probably not going to be fine. So now we're getting to like actual psychological studies, actually neurological studies that kind of tell that story. But we didn't know that. We didn't like make that association for a long time.
So when I think about fetal alcohol syndrome, I think of those pictures that I don't know that everyone was showed this, but my high school certainly showed us the pictures that were very extreme cases. And it was some amazing combination of saying, you know, don't have sex, but also don't drink alcohol, and definitely don't do the two things together. But it sounds like, and correct me if I'm wrong, it sounds like there might be kind of a spectrum of actual effects that we would see, that it's not just 0 or 100. Is that right?
Yeah. So to the end of the spectrum is fetal alcohol syndrome itself, which is, it falls under the umbrella of fetal alcohol spectrum disorders, and it is the most severe. I think clinically, I'm not a physician, so don't take any of this as medical advice, but clinically you need three things to diagnose that. You need growth impairments. So these kids usually don't follow the growth chart. You need neurological problems. So they'll have either like very severe neurological dysfunction, like not having parts of their brain, or just like have ADHD, have very sadly increased substance abuse. And then the third thing is that they'll have facial dysformity. So they'll have, you might have seen the pictures, like they have no philtrum, like they don't have the little curve on the top of your lips. They have widened eyes. So they have these like actual like deformities in their head. But not all kids have that. So a lot of parents will have like a glass of wine, or a lot of moms will have like a glass of wine, or like a lot. And then the kids are born fine, quote unquote. Maybe they're not on the growth chart, maybe they're a little bit slower, and they never make that association.
Yeah. Are there differences? And I guess this is probably going to get closer into your actual, you know, what you're diving into with your research. Are there differences in the stages of development for like drinking alcohol in terms of how much it'll affect a child?
There are. We don't know exactly what they mean. So we know that a lot of times let me backtrack this. So fetal alcohol syndrome is 100% preventable. If you don't drink, your kid won't have it. But what happens in a lot of cases is those first couple of months of the pregnancy, the mom doesn't know that she's pregnant yet, or maybe she hasn't like had her period and she thought it was normal for 1,000 different reasons. She'll continue to drink like she did before. Those periods are usually the most critical. We study a little bit later because we want to know like long-term development, but let's say you're not like a severe alcoholic and you just never stop drinking, chances are you're going to lose that baby in the first few months of your pregnancy. You're not going to they're not going to get through. What we study in our lab is usually second trimester onward. And then you still have severe neurological defects. You still have like a lot of those symptoms, but most of the time the kid is born. And one of the sad parts of this, not sad, but like it's a very intense part, they don't die. So like this is not necessarily a disease that will cause death immediately afterwards or anything like that. They'll go on living a long life. Like they don't have any decrease of like longevity, but they'll have all of those dysfunctions. So they'll have like a lower quality of life. And that's one of the reasons we study it. So like if we can protect that baby while the pregnancy is still going on, or if we can have like better therapies after the baby's born. And I'm going to use fetus and baby interchangeably. I hope you guys know the difference. But yeah, we focus a little bit later, but there are differences. First few months, first trimester, very critical to just having a baby, and then afterward to have quote unquote a normal baby.
So you said like they're, you're going to use them and we should know the difference. And I was like, yeah, I definitely know the difference. And then suddenly I realized like, I'm not sure I know the difference between.
Fetuses aren't born, babies are born.
That is a lovely, clear definition. That's fantastic because so much in science is not. Okay, so tell me a little bit more about, you're looking at the second trimester, you're looking at these long-term things. It sounds like it sounds like the high levels of alcohol consumption early on often lead to spontaneous abortion. That's not something that you can study long-term, or at least that's not what you're working on. So what models are you doing this in? I come from a microbiology background. Everything I do is you put it in a petri dish, you do stuff to these bacteria, and you see what happens. This is not one of those cases where you can just be manipulating stuff at will. What does your research look like?
So there's two sides of our lab right now. We do both animal and human studies. On animal studies, so this is where the fun part of science begins. Animal research, first of all, is very well regulated. Nothing that we're doing is like crazy science. But there are multiple ways to kind of mimic fetal alcohol syndrome the way we have been doing. And it's one of the, I think I replied to one of your tweets a while ago, like joking about this. But we literally get, after the babies are born, we inject them with ethanol subcutaneously. I don't know. I don't think it hurts. They also don't have like a very well-developed sense of pain by then. Just as they're born, we inject them with ethanol. That way we can control exactly how much ethanol they're getting, and we don't actually deal with the mom. So there are other ways you can study. We can inject the mom. We can put it in their drinking water. Some people vaporize the whole chamber with ethanol, which is kind of wild. There's a horrible way that people used to do this, which if your stomach is weak, don't listen to this. But people used to like take the embryos out while the mom was still pregnant and just put the whole embryo in a like jar of alcohol. Thank God we don't do that, and I think no one does this anymore. Why? So people might be asking like, why study if the baby was already born? Why study them now? Different species of animals, they have different periods of brain development. So mice around day 7 are actually around the same time that we are. Very hard to make exact conclusions, but they are like in our second or third trimester. So they might be born. So we're losing a few things in the model. So we're not mimicking the placenta. We're not mimicking like the mom metabolites or whatever. But we are getting like very precise doses, and we know exactly how much each mice is getting, basically. And then on the human side, it's super, super exciting. We work with cerebral organoids, and those are little mini brains.
Oh, yeah, this is what I wanted to talk to you about. You're like growing brains in labs.
They're so cool. I have to be careful because people overhype this or underhype this. But they are really cool.
There's no such thing as overhyping growing brain cells outside of a living creature. I understand. Like people are thinking of rats of Nim situations, but probably 7 people who ever watch this video are going to understand that reference. But anyway, I mean, that's so cool. So, okay, you grow brain cells in a lab without taking it out of a creature, right? Like, what is that? What are you doing?
Yeah. So we start with pluripotent stem cells. So these are not the embryonic stem cells. Those are basically, right now we have the technology to grab a skin sample or a blood sample from someone and create stem cells from that person with the same genome, the same information basically.
And like stem cells meaning like
So we
that's
start
basically so pluripotent cells. The pluri means like multiple, potent means like the ability to. So they have a bunch of different abilities. This is sort of a cell that you can tell to do other
do
things.
everything.
Okay.
Yeah. So the pluri is not everything technically. We're not able to make placental tissue out of pluripotent stem cells. Every other tissue in your body, you can
That's
do it.
crazy.
So if you want to study skin, if you want to study guts, if you want to study the brain, the heart, any kind of tissue, if you basically know the recipe of how that tissue develops in a human brain, in a human person, you can make that with stem cells. So after after the field started working with stem cells, there was a boom of like the first kidney cell, the first liver cell. That was 2008, 2009. And when I started college, or a couple of years into college, the whole organoid thing starts to become a field. And those are basically the stem cells. If we give them those right nutrients and the right proteins, and basically like if we follow that recipe of how to make a brain, the one part that we do is extra, apart from like just making brains, is putting them on a matrigel. So matrigel is just like a gooey, I don't know, a little looks like Jello. Very expensive though, but you put that in and you basically put a bunch of cells, well, like a little microscopic ball of cells, and it grows by itself. That's the protocol that we use. There are more sophisticated protocols now that like direct to be more cortical, so like more frontal or more specific to brain regions. But basically, we don't do much. It takes a long time. It takes a couple of months for it to be like fully developed, 2 to 3 months. It lasts forever. So with the whole thing going on, I had to kill some of not kill, but freeze some of mine. They were growing since March last year. Yeah. Which is breaks my heart. But there are like anecdotal evidence out there of people growing these since like 2016, 2017. So they'll keep going forever. They obviously do not mimic a whole human brain, but they have very organized structures. Basically, they have like an outer layer, an inner layer. And it's just much better to study on that than it is to study on just like a 2D cell culture, or like even a lot of the very early studies were done like in human cells. Well, which kind of cells? Well, kidney cells. So now we have an actual model that has like all the brain cells that your brain has, all the types of brain cells. Has the same kind of structure that your brain has, and you can test like functionality, so like how firing basically. So yeah, obviously both the animal and the human have their own limitations. That's why we do both. But it's just really cool to have those two.
So it kind of, even though the system is a little bit abstracted in the mouse model, where you've got, they're technically already born, they're, it's a mouse, it's not a person, but you still get the same effects. In the organoids, what are you looking for with the cells? Are you looking for them to be weird shaped? Are you just pouring ethanol on this? What's happening?
So this is a great story of how ridiculous science is. My first 2 years of my PhD, I was actually looking at anesthetics in the brain. The whole idea of this whole project, my whole PhD, came at a seminar where someone mentioned something about beer. And I was sitting right next to my colleague, or the other grad student in my lab, my colleague. And I was like, can we just put beer in the media? Would that be like a model for something? And she looked at me, she was like, yeah, I think it would be a model for like Thiago syndrome. And then the next week, we went to talk to my PI, and we thought like, hey, we have an idea. This is a lot easier than like vaporizing a chamber with like isoflurane or like some kind of anesthetic. And it is an actual disease. So like, should we study this? That's where the idea, at least for the meeting brains part, came through. Really like a idea that I should have been paying attention to. And So basically, what we look for is, first of all, cell death, because that is something that we are very concerned about. Because so when I mentioned that they have neurological defects, they can have like missing parts of their brain. So the corpus callosum, which is the bundle of fiber that connects the two sides of the brain, a lot of kids with more severe symptoms don't have that at all. Very, very, very severe cases, they might have microcephaly, and they might have like weird, not weird shapes, but like weird folding of their brain.
Is it okay? Is this true? I always heard that like the number of folds has something to do with intelligence. I know that like a totally smooth brain, that's bad. Is there a correlation to wrinkly and other things?
Yeah. Forgot what to call. My first year neuroscience teacher is gonna hate me, but I think it's just called corticalization.
Casual. Okay, fine.
But basically, you have more surface area. You basically have more surface area to your volume. For physical reasons, we're not allowed to have a gigantic brain, a gigantic head with a gigantic brain in it. Just wouldn't go through the birth canal. So instead, the way evolution made it work so we have like more connections and more neurons start folding in and out itself. So I think that you can search like for exact numbers, but if you unfold the whole brain, like it gets much bigger than the skull itself. I have beef with people that try to like compare humans and other animals as far as intelligence goes. Obviously, we're in a different level than most of other animals, but like octopuses are like crazy smart and they don't really have like a centralized brain. They have like weird structures instead of brains. I think dogs have a pretty smooth brain as well. So yes, it makes us unique, but neuroscience has this thing where every time we find something that's unique to humans, we're like, oh, this is the thing that makes us human. If you find a new cell type, you always call like, oh, this is the human cell type. No, I think it's overhyped a little bit, but no, there is a correlation between like at least complexity of brain connections and complexity of brains and their surface area.
Okay. Well, there's so many things that I didn't think about brains because it's just there. It's just doing its thing. But let's go back to when it's not doing its thing. Specifically, what is the hypothesis of what you're working on?
So we're trying to find, there's like specific genes, and that's the most boring part. Like, we have some genes, some candidate genes that we're looking at that might be dysregulated with alcohol. I think the overall picture that we're trying to paint with our research is just that cell death might be one of the biggest causes of this whole mechanism. So, and this is crazy, but a whole lot of cell death happens naturally in the brain. So when the brain is developing, we have like basically like a ridiculous spur where we create like thousands and thousands of cells by second. And then by the end of that development, the brain actually kills half of it, like about half of its cells.
That's how we get fingers, right?
We think that there's...
I know that sounded really slow.
Kind of, yeah. Right. We have
otherwise we'd have webbing.
What's it called? Like the web-handed thing. Similar mechanisms. So it's called like apoptosis or programmed cell death. It is like basically essential for everything that we do. But we think that there is probably some dysregulation there. There's like more cells dying than they should be dying. But also we don't know. So like I know I started saying that we know that this exists for like thousands of years, but like we still don't know what causes it. We still don't know exactly what it is going on during brain development that causes all the symptoms. And this is not my dissertation because that would be impossible. My overall theory is that there's probably 1,000 things going on at each individual, not just developmental time point, but like amount of alcohol and your genetic background. And yes, we're probably going to find some protective measures, but I wouldn't think that that's going to be a pill that you can take and solves all the problems. There are so many other, like, not even scientific, but like socio-economic issues and like just it's 100% preventable. So why haven't we cured yet? Kind of thing. So on one side, yes, I think it's very important to understand the mechanisms of it. But hopefully what we can do is like just bring awareness to it. That's part of what I do, like science communication and stuff like that.
Well, and it's especially important with what you said about that this really matters early on, and a lot of people don't know that they're pregnant. And I don't know. I don't know where the advocacy comes in. I'm sure this is something that you think about more as well. I know there's differences of opinion about, can people have a little bit of wine? It depends on their doctor. In general, I've heard no, just don't. But are there any, this maybe is way outside of your expertise, but are there people who are thinking about those issues of being pregnant before you know it, and how we can even start addressing that problem?
Yeah, I think that follows under those socioeconomic issues that I talked about. So there is, so it's estimated between like 1% and 5% of all children have this, which is not,
that is
very
not a
significant.
Small number.
No, and it's very, very likely underrepresented because a lot of people, well, if you go to a doctor and he asks how much you're drinking, chances are you're not going to say like, well, I just had like 4 bottles of wine yesterday. So chances are the number is probably higher, and it is overrepresented in people of, in basically like under our low income houses, people with like poor education, and it's mostly because they don't know that they can do it. So like it goes back to that anecdote of like my mom had it, so
the kind of survivor bias. Christine Liu says she's been like on this the whole time watching. She's hardcore repping you. She says such a good point about folds does not equal superiority. So just had to give her a shout out.
No, yeah. I hate when people try to make it seem like humans are like the superior race in the world. But no, so I think part of the advocacy comes into, going to those groups and talking to them about this, why you can't really have it. But part of the advocacy also goes to, and this is, I have to pull up the CDC numbers here. It is not only those groups, obviously, because if it was only like, well, poor people are doing it. No, it's not really. Like there are people with college degrees that still do this. There are people that like thousands of dollars a month are still doing.
Well, there's other issues too, right? Of access to birth control, access to healthcare. Can you afford to go take a pregnancy test? Could you afford to go take a Plan B? Can you afford to have birth control? Because I would think that a higher number of people, the people who are trying to get pregnant, are probably thinking about, am I getting pregnant and should I be drinking alcohol? More than people who aren't trying to get pregnant. And there's huge socioeconomic differences in who has access to even things like birth control. And, hopefully someday I get to be a mom. I don't know if that'll be adopting or having kids or what that's going to look like. But at the point where I want to have kids, I expect my lifestyle to change significantly. But there's certainly tons of times where, if I didn't have the privilege of having access to birth control and having access to, good health facilities, that if I were to get pregnant, I wouldn't know for a couple months. And my lifestyle, I don't drink a lot, but I definitely do drink. Is that, it's so cool. Sorry, I just went on a tangent because I've never thought about these things. So thank you for all the advocacy that you're doing. Where do you want to see the kind of neuroscience and advocacy coming together? Because both of them sound like a passion for you.
So let me, one thing that I forgot to say. So there's some overtones of like, not overtones, like there's a lot of sexism that goes into research because especially like older men, when they present stuff about fetal alcohol syndrome, they make it seem like it's a moral failure of the woman who drinks. So 2 points on that. One, Alcohol abuse disorder is an actual disorder. So it's not just that moms don't know that they're pregnant. They also have a disorder. Like it's not a moral failure of them. And second, and this might get controversial or not, but there are more studies, very pretty recent, that have been looking at sperm quality in the father, like alcoholic fathers. So when the mom doesn't drink at all, dad is an alcoholic. When they conceive the baby, well, this is all done in animals so far, but it's been being studied. So moms that don't drink at all, and then the animal father in this case, alcohol, they have kind of the same symptoms. So it is thought that there is like some what they call transgenerational effects. And we have no idea what that's going to be like in the future. But so yes, I think even my PI like sometimes slips and like make it seem like it's all a mom's fault.
Huh.
But anyway,
No, I love how aware you are. I'm sure I just screamed into my microphone. I'm so sorry, everyone. All right. Well, okay, I want to ask you one more question because Jaden is here in the chat, and they asked, are there ways to reverse symptoms? This is kind of an interesting question. It's like, is it, what happens?
We don't know of any, especially for cell death, which seems to be, well, now that I'm studying and whatever, what's the quote, like, if you're a hammer, everything's a nail. But now that I'm studying cell death, there's obviously no way to make those cells come back after they're dead. There's two, maybe three ways that we can look at this, at least clinically speaking. First of all, would be a protective measure. So think, what is it? I forgot what supplement pregnant women have to take. Vitamin something.
That's all of them. Oh, folate? I think they're the same.
Folate, yes. We didn't always know that folate was so necessary. Once we knew, it was simple enough, kind of, to have just folate in your prenatal supplementation, especially if you have the privilege of going to a doctor that's going to like cover your whole pregnancy. Now it's just one more thing you do. It could be to the future that, you found out at 3 months that you're pregnant and you were drinking, okay, just maybe just one supplementation. It's really fun though. The last experiment I did in the lab before this was
Waves
using
at
a natural
coronavirus.
Herb. Was to use a compound from a natural herb to see if that would stop cell death. So protective would be ideal. So like take this pill, not going to reverse any effects, but we can maybe like while you're still pregnant, we can make sure that the full development goes through. Second, and that's what we're doing already, is basically occupational therapy, physical therapy, kind of like palliative care from those children. So you drink all your pregnancy, or like you got diagnosed right away, taking care of them. So there are studies that show that if the child is raised in like an enriched environment, so if he learns how to read, if he learns how to like play music, if he has like a good social life, has like a very balanced life, he won't have like as bad as a psychological effect as like a kid who's undernurtured. And that just goes to everything, but it seems to be more intense for fetal alcohol spectrum disorders kids. And then the third, and this is like almost future stuff, it would be not necessarily to correct anything that happened during pregnancy, but to maybe, I don't even know how to say this, but like improve their cognition and improve their abilities after birth. So kids born like poor cognition, takes a long time to learn how to read, to have some kind of like pharmacological supplementation after birth. And there are some studies looking into that. I think choline is like a throwaway for everything neuroscience. Everything you throw choline, it seems to improve, which doesn't mean you should go and buy choline pills. They're expensive. But there are people that are studying these, so like kind of improving your general brain health after your birth, after you were born.
Wow, interesting.
Yeah. So multiple ways to tackle it.
It sounds like It sounds to me like if we had a better idea of these mechanistic ways, so why it's happening chemically, physically, in terms of nerves and electricity and all that action potential. I'm just throwing out words that I remember vaguely from 10 years ago. Um, it sounds like if we knew more about that, then maybe we could do a lot more targeted drug development or therapeutics or all these different pieces. So that's like totally what you're working on, which is amazing. I want to wrap us up here so people can go back to looking at the rest of the internet. But before you go, the question I always like to ask is regarding this topic, regarding the mental, cognitive differences of uh, having your biological mother drink or your biological father drink while you're a fetus, before you're a fetus. All the way to the socioeconomic parts of these pieces, what are the things that you're actively trying to look at on your own? What are you Googling? What do you get excited about to read?
I really love cerebral organoids and the mini brain. Um, so I've been studying this for like since I started the PhD, and I'm very interested to see how we can improve that model.
More beer.
So
Just give
I
it
don't
more
know if
beer.
you're
It's
familiar,
fine.
but like with oh no, like improve it as like make it a more complex mini brain. Um, so like with animal research, we're all about like refine, reuse, and what are the three R's?
Mm,
Reduce. So like we don't want to waste any animals. We don't want to like cause any pain that's not necessary. So when I went to DC to advocate for science, one of the things we're advocating for was like, please protect animal research. It's very important. But if in the future we can do all these complex studies and have like all the things we don't have in mini brains right now, which is like an immunological system, a vascular system. So I think it would be really, really good if we can study all these
mm-hmm,
horrible things in not in a human brain, but not
mm-hmm,
someone's brain. And there are some really cool genetic studies, so it will be a life on its own. But like there are genetic influences in this. So like there are certain populations that are more affected by it. There are certain populations who are like a mom can drink a lot and you don't see any effects. There's like specific mutations in certain populations, and with with the kind of stem cells that we use, we can basically grab your cell and test your genome and compare it to someone in Southeast Asia and like look at these two complete different genomes from two different populations, put them under the same amount of alcohol in the mini brains. Let's see if they react differently. Let's see if their genome is playing any role in it. So I'm very curious about the human part of it, not so much
yeah.
the animal research. Animal
Yeah.
research is fine.
Necessary evil. Well, Thiago, this was awesome. I just want to talk about mini brains all the time now because that's so weird. There's so many different pieces, but I really appreciate what you ended with there too of having even genetic components, having all these different pieces coming together. It's such a new field of research, even though, the fetal alcohol syndrome you said was coined probably in around the 70s. But tons of new stuff emerging there. Kind of goes back to Liesel's question of we used to see people used to drink, kids turned out fine. I think you did a great job answering that of there's a whole spectrum of what kind of problems or conditions that can come up, and it comes up in different populations. But what I've been hearing you say over and over again is that this is a totally preventable situation. So especially if you know you're pregnant or if you're trying to get pregnant, just don't drink. Is that about right?
For, for both people, actually, if you're trying to get pregnant, mom and dad shouldn't be
I
drinking.
appreciate the
Just saying.
solidarity regardless too.
Um,
Like if the unit is going to produce a baby, like let's get on the same page. Let's have a little bit of like cohesion at the start. So awesome. Well,
absolutely.
thank you so much, Thiago. You've got your tag down below you. Are you comfortable with people reaching out to you, asking questions, things like that? Awesome.
Yeah,
That's so cool.
absolutely.
I'm glad we got this excuse. I will talk to you later, but you take care of yourself, okay? You're
Cool.
super
Thank you so
welcome.
much.
All right, everyone, that is it for today. I had a great time talking to Thiago. Legitimately, we just set this up because I wanted an excuse to chat with him. And this seemed like a great way to do it. All of science is awesome. If you have science that you want to talk about, want to share some misconceptions, whatever else, and you just want to chat for half an hour, let me know. Send me a DM or all my things every time. I can't figure it out down there. In the meantime, like and subscribe and keep yourself safe. Follow all the rules. I don't really know what else to say. Pet your dogs, whatever. Have a good one.